Corporate boardrooms and radical political factions share a surprising linguistic anchor, the command to focus on the fundamentals. In the language of finance, this means stripping a company down to its pure, quantifiable valuation. In the realm of religious extremism, it means stripping human morality down to a rigid, uncompromising dogma. A modern postcolonial subject navigating the geopolitical landscape is often trapped between these two converging systems of power. They are asked to assimilate into the machinery of global capital, while simultaneously being monitored by an expanding state security apparatus. Filmmaker Mira Nair visualizes this exact structural tension perfectly in her 2012 adaptation of Mohsin Hamid's novel, The Reluctant Fundamentalist. Her protagonist, Changez, is a young Pakistani man working in elite American finance. He is a direct product of a decentered global empire, a system that has no single geographical center, but relies on networks of culture, media, and finance to absorb the entire globe. This empire initially recruits Changez, rewarding his intelligence and cultural fluency to lubricate financial operations. Then, suddenly, it flips. The system begins to aggressively police his racial identity, subjecting him to sudden discipline and suspicion. Analyzing Nair's film requires looking at a specific formal tension. She takes a highly ambiguous, monologic novel and translates it into a conventional, multi-perspectival cinematic thriller. The visual medium successfully exposes the physical mechanics of global power, surveillance, corporate hierarchies, borders. Yet by pushing the narrative toward a clean resolution, the film risks domesticating the very post-colonial critique it sets out to deliver. The epicenter of this corporate modernity is New York City, specifically the glass offices of the valuation firm Underwood Samson. Theorists Michael Hardt and Antonio Negri define empire not as a traditional nation-state conquering territory, but as a deterritorialized system. It governs through flexible, transnational networks of wealth and cultural influence. To function efficiently, this global capital requires frictionless movement across borders. It actively recruits young, educated individuals from the global periphery, absorbing their diverse backgrounds to help multinational corporations expand into new territories. The mechanism for this absorption is the Ivy League university. Changez's Princeton education validates his intellect and serves as the initiation ritual that brings a talented outsider into the flexible hierarchies of Western finance. Once inside, subjects are trained in an ideology that economist Joseph Stiglitz identifies as market fundamentalism. This is an economic worldview that reduces human lives, cultures, and communities to pure calculation and profit metrics. Nair visualizes this ideology directly through her production design. The American corporate environments are dominated by cool, metallic tones and rigid glass geometry, reflecting a world governed entirely by commodification and efficiency. Contrast this with the warm, textured environments of Changez's family life in Lahore. The lighting is softer, prioritizing poetic and cultural roots over quantifiable output. When Changez is inside Underwood Samson, the camera often isolates him within vast corporate spaces. He is framed against harsh lines, emphasizing his physical subjection to a system that measures his worth entirely by financial yield. Market fundamentalism requires absolute adherence to the bottom line, disregarding the human cost of its decisions. It is a systemic violence that structurally mirrors religious extremism. The September 11th attacks function as a violent historical rupture, radically reorganizing the mechanics of this global power structure. The geopolitical atmosphere shifts instantly. The open, flexible flow of transnational capital is replaced by hard borders, racial profiling, and an environment of intense suspicion. The network reverses its function. The exact same global apparatus that celebrated and recruited Changez's hybrid identity now actively disciplines it, marking his cultural background as an inherent threat. Nair's cinematography adapts to this shift. The confident tracking shots of New York dissolve into tight, restrictive framing. Changez is repeatedly shown in interrogation rooms and airport security checkpoints, highlighting the sudden physical vulnerability of his body. This friction is mirrored in his romantic relationship with Erica, an American woman who serves as a direct allegory for his relationship with Western hegemony. Nair shoots their interactions with emotional distance. Even in moments of intimacy, the physical space between them communicates an unequal power dynamic and a deep cultural disconnect. Erica is grieving her deceased boyfriend, Chris. Changez is eventually reduced to a temporary, inadequate substitute for this lost, idealized Western past. When Changez is finally pushed out of his career and his relationship, it is not a glitch in the global system. The sudden exclusion of the hybrid subject is empire's security logic functioning exactly as designed. The complexity of this narrative is tied to its composition. Author Mohsin Hamid began writing the source novel before the September 11th attacks and finished it afterward. The text carries the permanent scar of that historical timeline. If we visualize the novel's formal structure, it is a pure, one-way dramatic monologue. Changez speaks to an unseen, entirely silent American listener, whose reactions and intentions are never revealed to the reader. This unbroken silence generates a radical epistemological unease. It denies the audience any moral certainty, forcing them to navigate the narrative without confirmation of who is telling the truth or who is in danger. Nair translates this into a multi-perspectival cinematic thriller. She introduces an active American journalist, relying on cross-cutting and detailed flashbacks to fill in the novel's deliberate gaps. This thriller framework has a clear advantage. It successfully visualizes the concrete, real-world operations of intelligence agencies, airport security, and corporate boardrooms. However, this specific method of cinematic translation introduces a critical flaw, a dynamic critics refer to as reorientalism. By elevating the American journalist to a primary point of view, the film inherently recenters a Western investigative gaze. The audience relies on the American character to validate Changez's story. Consequently, the postcolonial subject is processed and interpreted through a framework specifically designed for Western narrative consumption, relying on familiar visual tropes of foreign spaces and potential danger. By supplying the visual and emotional information that Hamid deliberately withheld, the film trades the formal radicalism of the novel for narrative comfort. Throughout the adaptation, Nair establishes cultural and literary spaces, like the cafes of Istanbul and the poetry of Lahore, as clear cinematic metaphors. They stand in direct opposition to the logic of financial commodification. These spaces represent what theorist Homi Bhabha calls the third space. This is the tense, ongoing reality of the hybrid subject, caught between multiple cultures and navigating unequal power structures. Within this framework, Changez occupies a complicated position. He is a casualty of racialized security networks, but he is not a passive victim, nor is he a pure, untethered revolutionary hero. His decision to abandon his corporate valuation job and return to Pakistan to teach constitutes an act of political resistance. He refuses the logic of market fundamentalism, even as his agency remains constrained by global politics. This creates a core paradox in Nair's adaptation. The film attempts to capture the lived tensions of post-9/11 globalization while operating within the commercial constraints of global cinema. It provides vital visual clarity to abstract systems of corporate and state power, making the mechanics of empire immediate and undeniable. But in resolving the story's ambiguity, it partially softens the challenge posed by the original text. Ultimately, the film inadvertently proves its own central thesis. It opens a space for dialogue, yet demonstrates that achieving a genuine, unresolved equality of perspective remains intensely difficult under the architecture of the modern global empire.